Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining in this webinar. We have been doing this webinar since the start of this year, and we are at the fourth iteration currently. To talk a little about ourselves, at Olive Gaea, we are revolutionizing business sustainability as a leading climate tech company based out of Dubai. With our advanced AI-driven carbon management and accounting platform, which is Zero, we have been enabling companies in Middle East and India to achieve the net zero goals. Our carbon neutral delivery API makes carbon neutral operations attainable for e-commerce and logistics. And through our consultancy, we do craft new strategies that drive significant environmental milestones across various industries. So all in a nutshell, at Olive Gaea, we are all about science-based results. We started this series of webinar in January as part of a continuous effort to help companies deliver better in their net zero journeys. This is the fourth webinar in the iteration. For the first three webinars, we delved into the very foundation of what it means to do a carbon footprint assessment for your business, how to manage different scopes of greenhouse gas emissions, and then we also delved into how to tackle scope 3 emissions, which are a very big problem for the industry currently. Today, we are looking at part one of a multi-part webinar focused around finance emissions. So today, we are going to look at the framework and certain calculation methodologies. I would like you to introduce to Vivek Tripathi, who's the co-founder and CEO at Olive Gaea, and Raghu is our carbon emission specialist here.
Thank you, Shiv, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is the first part of our finance emission series. In this part, we will be providing you an overview and discuss about what's the finance emission and its baseline calculation. So the webinar agenda will be that we will be having a quick recap of our previous webinars, and after that we'll be presenting you the problem statement of the finance emission. Then we will started with exploring the finance emission, their challenges and calculation methodologies and their frameworks. So after that, we'll be deep dive into the investment classes, and finally we will be giving you an overview of our Zero platform, where the challenges will be addressed and we are giving the results. So about the quick webinar recap. So our first webinar will be, we have talked about what's the GHG emission, what's the scope emission, and how baseline can be set. And the webinar 2, it's about more about the target setting, the decarbonization lever, and how that can be planned, challenge can be overcome, and the planning and budgeting. And our third webinar will be mostly around the scope 3 emission, which is account for 70% of the today corporate emissions level. So in that webinar, we have given an overview of the different categories of the emission, their calculation methodology, and how that can be calculated, and how we can overcome their challenges in target setting as well as in delivering that scope 3 emission targets. So these webinars are recording are available in our YouTube site.
So to add to that, all our previous webinars and our future webinars as well, you can just go to Google, search for Olive Gaea, and you can find the full versions of these episodes uploaded there. Thank you, Raghu. You can continue.
Yeah. So discussing about what finance emission and how it's relevant to the today's world. So as we have given 3 problem statements. So the first statement is come around the 95% of the bank emission is typically associated with finance emission, that is scope 3 and category 15, that investment emission in GHG protocol. And about 91% of the bank chief risk officers have addressed that climate is the emerging risk for their bank portfolios. So it can have an impact on this bank asset levels and the bank returns. And further to that, 54% of the banks have not set their net zero target at all.
To all our attendees, we've just launched a poll. You should be able to see it within the Zoho application where we are presenting this. So I would just request everyone to, go to the poll, take a moment and just put your votes in. So Vivek, as per the polls, I think majority for the people who have polled, 75% of our attendees feel that their companies don't calculate financed emissions. So I think this session is going to be quite useful for everyone, seeing that we are going to delve more into this.
Sure.
So we can continue.
Thanks, Shiv, and thanks, Raghu, for setting the context here. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining once again this series of webinars here. Today's one has been set as an agenda is around finance transformation. I can understand that probably few of the poll participants might not be coming from the industry where finance transformation is pertinent. I can understand, but the ones who are coming from banking, financial investment banking sectors as such, or asset management companies, definitely finance transformation makes a big chunk of their overall emissions, and specifically within the scope 3, as Raghu was earlier mentioning. So from here on, I will try to capture the rest of the agenda points. So Raghu, if you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So that's where it all starts, right? We all have heard about Paris Climate Agreement and various tenets under that agreement, where countries, governments, businesses are requested to take their pledges against the biggest challenge of climate change as such. Very specifically, Article 2.1 of Paris Climate Agreement says very specifically around making finance flows consistent towards the pathways of reduced greenhouse gas emission and climate resilient development. Now, to us, this looks like a complex statement. If you really break it down, what it entails at the heart of it is that the financing is the core of how the world is going to get prepared for making strategies around the climate change. And that's where the interest is to basically help the green industries finance more, so that that becomes sort of a larger part of the economies, but also at the same time scaling down investments into carbon intensive businesses as such. So this is again two-pronged. One is increasing investment in renewable sector, increasing investment in the greener sectors, and at the same time start scaling down investment into carbon intensive businesses as such. So that's the core of the financed emission, where it comes from. Move to the next, please. Now, if we look into it, why finance emission becomes so significant, and if we look at that, finance emission helps you understand that based on the investment done by a bank or any investment or asset management company, that basically defines that how that investee company is going to behave in terms of work towards the climate change, in terms of what level of emissions that particular industry is adding to the overall problem of the climate change. Hence, it is very, very significant to look into it that the financing industry should be putting their funds, putting their money behind this transition to net zero. It also becomes very important to look into two aspects of the risk, which is around the investment as such. And as we all have heard about, there is an element of transition risk and physical risk. How to put it simply, transition risk simply helps you understand that how your investments are contributing into the problem of climate change or this whole climate crisis as such. And the physical risk is how the other way it happens, how the climate impacts your investments. So put it simply, I deciding to put money into a certain investment, how this climate change problem is going to jeopardize my investment. And the physical transition risk is how climate is going to impact my investment and the returns over that investment. So there are two sides of this coin when it comes to finance emission and the investment related risk due to the climate change challenge as such. The other importance brings in from the perspective of transparency, because every investment today is backed by either some large investment fund or some pension funds. So there are multiple stakeholders involved when it comes to investing into various different assets or sectors as such. And that's where finance emission, doing your calculations around finance emission robust, only increases transparency in terms of where the money is actually being flowing into the overall economy as such. If I talk about compliance and regulations, we've all heard about it. Multiple countries are following suit. Similarly, countries which are, say, majorly in the GCC region, again, we are seeing an upcoming trend towards increasing regulation, especially around the investment sector, in the banking sector as such, when it comes to financed emission. Again, as the main tenet of Paris Climate Agreement, finance emission help you, understanding your finance emission help you understand that how well aligned your overall investment with respect to the climate strategy as such. And of course, all your funding, which is going into multiple different investments or sectors as such, helps make the sustainable industry thrive better. Being the funds made available to them, it helps basically scale those industries which can create a bigger impact on this challenge of climate change as such. Next one, please. Now, all said and done, we understand it, that finance emissions are very critical. But again, we've seen that majorly there are banks, though interested in doing their finance emission calculations, there are multiple challenges, and we are just trying to sum them up. Of course, this whole element of engaging internal teams into doing this calculation around finance emission, it involves a huge amount of resource allocation to that. You need to set up a specific team of data engineers, data scientists to look into multiple data points, various different data sources. Hence, it makes this whole exercise a little cumbersome and time consuming. The second big element comes in because financed emission is a derived emission. It's an assisted emission, which the bank's investments are causing. Hence, the critical element comes in when you need to really identify what is the actual emission which your investment is doing, basically your investee's emission. And more often than not, investee companies would not be having a detailed analysis and availability of that emission data. So that again creates a big challenge with respect to financed emission. If we look at the standardized regulations and the legislations around how to calculate this, there again, it's all in the evolution. It's still evolving to a stage where it can become a sort of a global principles under which you should be calculating. So again, there are multiple frameworks, there are multiple legislations around it, and that makes it a little more complex. The double counting problem is there all across when we talk about GG protocol, or when it comes to finance emission becomes more pertinent, because in the same asset or in the same industry or in the same investment, there might be multiple parties involved in. Nobody just simply raises funds from a single bank or a single institution, but there are multiple parties. So hence again becomes very important to understand the apportionment of that financed emission, which entity should be owning what amount of it. That makes it a little more complex to avoid the problem of double counting as such. Next one, please. Thanks. Yeah, so here again, we've got a small break to help you understand about, help us understand about what sort of key challenges that you might be facing. You might be seeing a couple of options out there. So yeah, Shiv, if you can, please help.
So the poll is currently live. I would just oblige everyone to just quickly put your votes there. This poll is the most important for this webinar because based on the votes that we get, we would try to focus on certain things which may be problematic for our attendees. For the stats that I'm able to currently see, Vivek, it seems like some of the key issues that people are facing is primarily like they do have to align to multiple frameworks. There is definitely a huge gap in the investee emission data. It's a time-consuming process, and a resource allocation under an organizational structure sometimes can get a bit problematic. So I think based on that, you can take it ahead.
Sure. No, I guess that's a great insight, and that definitely aligns with what we are hearing from the market, what we are hearing from some of the largest banks here in the region. It's somewhat similar to a situation where multiple frameworks are there, and that creates a sort of a confusing ground where to start with, and basically the set of resources which are internally required. Because typically what we've seen is that banks, when it comes to finance emission, it's primarily the risk team, the sustainability team together had been working on finance emission, and again finding out very specific climate-related science-based skills within the team makes this problem a little more worse. And that's where definitely sort of getting all the science and analytics done behind this finance emission makes it a little more complex. So we will definitely take those as key insights here from, and we'll try to address them in the rest of the webinar. Raghu, if you can go to the next one, please. So yeah, so starting with the very first challenge that we were talking about around the framework. So it all looks very confusing. There are task force for finance related financial disclosures. There is principle of responsible investments, and there are multiple such alliances that we talk about: NZBA, NZAOA, Now, if I really try to put them in sort of an order here, it all depends on what sort of aspiration the bank, the financial institution has, right? All these frameworks come up with the basic principles of doing a science-backed calculation and making your disclosures consistent. So that's like a common thread across whether you pick up PRI, whether you pick up NZAOA. The main essence out of all these frameworks comes out from that you do a very scientific and a consistent way of collecting your data, making sure the data that you are taking up has a proper backup or sort of a fallback in terms of what sort of data gaps that exist. So identifying itself in the first place where you stand in today, what are the gaps in the data that you have, and addressing that gap year on year progressively is the common, I would say that the common messaging across all these frameworks. Now, again, depends on what sort of frameworks that the bank is intending to align with. What we have seen locally here in the GCC region, pretty much TCFD, PRIs, NZAOA, and Net Zero Banking Alliance. Those are the frameworks which most of the banks would align with themselves with. But core of all these alliances and respective reporting requirements start with the bank started working on their financed emission itself. And that's where we would talk more about it in the coming slides. Coming up with the framework first. So framework very, very clearly, which is today a global practice is the PCAF framework, which is around partnership of carbon accounting for financials. They have come up with multiple set of frameworks, one for the banking and the investment sector. There is another set of framework for the insurance companies. So in totality, it is BFSI sector, which PCAF sort of provides the framework for calculation of financed emission. And if we look at really PCAF again is backing itself with GHG protocol. So it all starts with GHG protocol as the mother document. And from there, they have come up with very specific financed emission calculations framework by PCAF. Now, PCAF aligns very well with pretty much all the regulations, all the frameworks or alliances that we have talked about. To name a few, TCFD, CDP, science-based target initiatives, and other banking alliances that we might have seen, we've seen in the previous slide, they pretty much align with their PCAF. PCAF, again, as we speak, it's sort of an evolving framework. As you can understand, more and more complexities coming within the financial industry. There are multiple alternative ways of investments or revenue generation for banks, and hence PCAF is continuing to evolve with this process to include holistic investment sector as such. At the moment, there are certain set of assets that are being very, very, I would say that precisely being captured by PCAF, and we'll see that later. But there is again few more type of assets which PCAF is further working on and developing. Starting with PCAF, it launched in 2015, and as we see that by 2019, 28 global banks have already participated in PCAF and started reporting their numbers around it. That same number of banks basically gone up to 480 in 2024 as we speak now. So this pretty much says that globally it's a trend now with the banks to start working on their financed emission and start looking at PCAF as the main guiding document or framework to come up with a very definitive answers towards the financed emission. Next, please. When it comes to the financed emission calculation, now again, the approach, the way bank invests into a particular sector and the expectation of the revenue generation from that particular investment defines that what sort of treatment should be taken when it comes to finding out the financed emission for the bank. And now let me simplify that. Bank has their asset books typically, which comprises of multiple different type of assets. So as we all would understand that banks do invest in liquid listed equities or corporate bonds, which are issued by companies which are already listed in the market. Banks also offer business loans to private entities and basically sort of unlisted companies, small companies, SMEs. So those are sort of business loans. Now in both these cases, again, you can see that whatever banks invest in, it could be for for a defined or sort of an identified application of that fund, or it could be completely undisclosed. Say in case of business loan, it could be very, very specifically for, let's say, buying an asset or buying a furnace. So that's like a disclosed source. You know very clearly that the bank is giving me money to buy this particular furnace, and eventually furnace would burn either oil or coal and would generate certain emissions. However, in case of listed equity, you can think of it, if tomorrow the bank is buying 10,000 shares of E and now that money that E and is raising by its sort of listing out its share, it's like a corporate use, right? Whatever funds being generated, it's not specifically to probably erect particular towers, telecom towers. It could be for a corporate purpose. It could be for expansion. It could be for hiring. It could be for multiple reasons. So the proceeds which are generated from these investments are sort of not definitive. It could be very different reasons. Especially now coming to project finance, here the bank very clearly knows that the funds that been raised, it has been raised for a specific project. Say putting up a power plant, or putting up a hydropower plant, or putting up a cement manufacturing unit. So here the bank knows very clearly the proceeds been used for a specific purpose. Similarly, commercial real estate is another type of investment that bank does. Bank does give money to large real estate developers to develop these commercial real estate properties where there would be multiple tenants, there'll be multiple offices, multiple commercial use of that building. And that's how the commercial real estate based investments come into picture. Mortgages are typically me and you buying or taking the home loan for building a property, or probably for home improvement, or probably for buying land. So these are all mortgages. So again, one particular product line from the banks are typically giving these personal loans or mortgages to individuals like us. Motor vehicle loans, as the name suggests very clearly, for any sort of a motor purchase. That's again one of the revenue generation stream for the banks. Coming to the last one is the sovereign wealth, sovereign bonds as such. Now, as the businesses need money, same is the case for the governments. The sovereign also needs money, and sovereign issues multiple bonds, to which typically these banks are the first sort of respondents to put their money behind those bonds. So in a way, again, this is sort of an undisclosed proceeds. The proceeds been raised for undisclosed application of those funds. Country might be raising, let's say, $10 billion bond, but you would never know where exactly it's going to go, whether it's going to go to telecom sector, whether it's going to go to railways, it's going to go into ports. You never know that. Again, the proceed being raised, but the disposal of those funds are not clear as such. So that's how these are, I would put it, these are probably 7 asset classes which are defined under PCAF. And for each type of asset class, there is a definitive methodology how to calculate the financed emission. Now, if we look at how PCAF aligns with greenhouse gas protocol and science-based targets, the way how assets are defined, similarly, the PCAF and basically the greenhouse gas protocol and SBTi have also identified similar sort of assets from various different industries, and they are also one-to-one tying up with how PCAF defines various different assets. Moving on from here. So now once we have known that, looked at the bank's asset book, you know very clearly out of bank's total balance sheet or the asset book of, let's say, $1 billion, how much of the money the bank has put into listed equity, mortgages, commercial real estate loans. So you know very, very clearly that out of this $1 billion investment the bank has done, it has done into these various different multiple assets. Now, the basic calculation methodology is very simple, right? You need to find the attribution factor, look at the investee emission, and that would give you the financed emission. The multiplication of those two factors would give you the financed emission. What exactly is attribution factor? As I was mentioning earlier, that financed emission is more of an assisted emission. Bank itself is not burning fuel. Whatever they are burning fuel, that would get captured in bank's scope 1 and to a certain extent in scope 2, but not in financed emission category. Financed emission is an assisted emission, which the bank is basically helping an investee company to emit by the way of funding that particular asset or particular production plant or investing in their equity investments as such. So attribution factor is the proportion of the final emission that investee company is going to do, which will get attributed to bank because of the nature of investment that they have done in that particular project or asset as such. So as put a very simple case, let's say a commercial real estate project is raising funds from multiple banks, and it needs, let's say, a million dirham or 10 million dirham. And of that, if a particular bank A has invested 30% out of that 10 million dirham, then in that case, the attribution factor for the bank for this particular investment in commercial real estate would be 0.3. So that's where you find out the attribution factor. Now, this is one simple case. Bank might have probably 10 different commercial real estate and would have different level of investment done in those real estates. Accordingly, multiple attribution factors for each of those investments need to be calculated. That's part one of the calculation. The part two is the investee emission. Again, investee emission is very clear. After bank investing in the money into a particular asset or a plant or a commercial real estate, that particular asset or the project is going to do certain emissions, right? Because of the energy consumption or because of the direct fuel consumption and burning. So there would be certain level of emissions which would be associated with that investment. Now, that is what the emissions, the investee emissions are. So if you look into this same case, the commercial real estate, based on the commercial real estate's annual emission, annual energy consumption, it might be, let's say, they are emitting 10,000 tons of total emission from that particular commercial real estate. In that case, the financed emission finally would be under the bank's total emission under scope 3 category 15 would be 0.3 into 10,000. So 3,000 tons would be the final effective financed emission, which would be booked under the bank's emission under scope 3 category 15. So that's how you calculate it. Now, this whole calculation is pretty straightforward, where you are only looking into two factors, attribution and investee emission, and multiplying to get it. This becomes complex, depends on how complex the investment or the asset register the bank is. Now, bank would not be just investing into one, bank would be investing into multiple assets, within multiple assets into multiple different type of companies. Now, different investee companies would have a different emission profiles. Hence, the whole problem becomes more sort of a data challenge in the first place. Like, how would you identify the attribution factors? How are you going to work around your investee emissions? And then a simple multiplication is going to give you the financed emission. Now, looking at the first part of the problem in this slide, the attribution factor. As I was saying that this is assisted emission. So you need to find out what the bank's investment's contribution is in the total investment raised by the investee company. So in the earlier case, if the commercial real estate was raising 10,000 or whatever, let's say 10 million, and bank was giving them 3 million. So that's where the attribution factor was 30%. Very simple. So you can see that commercial real estate, the one in the center, the block, the commercial real estate, for that an investment, the attribution factor is simply the outstanding amount, which is 3 million, divided by the property value at origination. Now, why it is that? Because remember that the commercial real estate was raising 10 million for the purpose of building that commercial real estate. So that's the total value at the time of origination, right? When the loan was first raised. So at that stage, you would find out that this is 3 million divided by 10 million. So it would give you 30% of the attribution factor. Now, in this case, it was property value at origination. If you look at listed equity or corporate bonds, in that case, attribution factor would vary depending on whether you're talking about a listed entity or a private entity. In case of listed entity, one factor which is always available is the enterprise value. Now, enterprise value is typically the market capitalization of the company. So either it is total assets or debt that you need to add up, or it would be the market capitalization which is available on the bourse, right? So you can use that, including cash. So basically, whatever the total enterprise value worth, including the cash value is the total value of the company, of that investee company. And out of that, whatever number of shares that the bank has bought, depending on and the share value, the total value would become the outstanding amount. So this is how you would calculate it for the listed entities as such. Similarly, project finance, as you can see in the box second next to the listed equity, there it is only about total outstanding. So I am raising a project finance for erecting a thermal power plant of, let's say, 1,000 megawatt, and I needed, let's say, 10,000 crores. And in that 10,000 crores, the bank, I'm taking a sort of a 70-30 debt equity ratio, and I'm raising that 70,000 crores from the bank. So in that case, the bank's outstanding amount would be 70,000 crores divided by total debt and equity, which was 100,000 crores. So my total attribution factor, the bank's attribution factor, would be 70%. So that's how you work it out. So what bank needs to do to start with is to look into their asset book, look into each and every investments, look into what is the current outstanding value in the reporting year in terms of their investment. If it is shares bought, then the total share value and the share price, closing share price for that year, that would give you the outstanding value. If it is project finance, then whatever debt that you have initially given, and there would be some repayment happening. So in that year, whatever the final book value of that loan in the asset book is what your numerator would be defined. The denominator would be is basically either the whole company value or the total project value, or it could be the total emissions from that, or basically the total value of that commercial real estate. So that's how numerator and denominators vary depending on the type of asset the bank is investing into. So this basically sums up one part of the overall financed emission calculation bit. Coming to the next one, which is about your investee emission. Now, within investee emission, now you can understand that on the bank's asset book on any day, if you can think of, the smallest of the banks would have, if not less than probably 10,000 different clients into various different categories. Probably 2,000 of them have taken mortgages, 5,000 of them taken commercial real estate loans. Then there'll be certain big industries in which you might have project invested in, and there'll be certain shares which the company must have bought of probably thousands of the companies. So this is where the complexity starts coming into picture, because so far whatever you had been doing is pretty much calculating my proportion, the bank's proportion into that particular investment, which is majorly that point of data, that amount of data would be internally available. If it is about project finance, the bank would know very clearly based on the project report submitted by the investee company that what was the total value of, what was the total money that they needed to make that project work, and what is the proportion that bank has invested in. And they would also know that what had been the repayment so far. So everything pretty much is highly sort of still internalized within the bank system itself. You can still identify the various different attribution factor. The main challenge comes in when there is the part 2 of the emission calculation, which is around the investee's emission. Now, investee emission depends on the maturity of the industry, the investees, how serious they were being in terms of calculating their carbon emissions, coming up with verified reports. So all of that, and hence the overall financed emission calculation, which is 2-part, attribution factor and the investee emission basically decides that what is the data score that would be given to the final financed emission calculation. And that becomes very critical. Think of it. There is one bank who is calculating their financed emission based on, let's say, just for an example's sake, the one which is written against 5, which is estimated GSD emission with limited support, right? Which is high level of estimation done if they have invested in a cement plant and they found out some intensity of cement production, and they come up with that number and say that, oh, my investee's emission is 1,000 tons and my attribution factor was 30%. So my total emission is 300 tons. That is one level of financed emission that the bank can provide. Now, this financed emission would be given a score of 5. However, the other bank is very, very serious about calculating their financed emission, and hence they reached out to their investee company and requested to provide the verified GHG emission data. Now, another cement plant which might be doing their emission calculation year on year, getting it third-party certified, independent verified, and they provide that, oh, their emission is 500 tons, or let's say 2,000 tons. Bank has invested again a certain amount, and based on that, whatever total financed emission comes up, in that case, bank will get their financed emission score at data score 1. Now, as the data score goes down from 1 to 5, the overall confidence of the financed emission calculation goes down. And that's where it sort of creates a challenge for your stakeholders to believe in whatever number that you're projecting in your financed emissions, how accurate are they? Hence, creating a financed emission inventory which is of high data score is utmost important, and it becomes very critical. And as we have seen earlier also, when we were talking about the complexity and challenges within financed emission, one biggest challenge comes in when it comes to finding out the emission from your investee companies, so that to score high data quality scores for your financed emission calculation. So these data quality scores have been basically these are part of the PCAF framework itself. So depending on what sort of data score that your particular emission has got, your overall portfolio data score would be calculated. So this again would be a weighted average depending on what percentage you invested in private equity, what percentage you have invested in, let's say, listed equities, or probably into project finance, and respective data score of each investment would help you get at a portfolio level what is the overall data score. So this tells very clearly that how serious or probably committed the bank is declaring their financed emission number. So that's the criticality or importance of the data score is here. Move to the next one, please. Yeah, so I will not go into each and every asset class here, but as you can see that PCAF has come up with various different data scores for different asset types. So this particular slide talks about every investment which is into listed equity, corporate bonds, business loans, or project finance. The data score would vary. Now, as I was saying that, as long as your investee provides verified emission data and your financed emission is based on that data, your score would be data score 1. Again, the score would go to score 2 if the data is provided by investee, but it is unverified. So it is not third-party audited or verified as per ISO standards. So in that case, again, your calculation of financed emission would be good, but the data score would go down to score 2. Third option would be the energy consumption. Now, the investee company doesn't have their financed emission data, but what they can provide is that what is the DEWA bill that they are paying year on year. Now, this is very specific, one part of their overall emission. And if your calculation of financed emission is based on energy consumption, it would still be falling under the category of score 2. So this is again some level of estimation closely to the level of financed emission, closely to the level of investee emission, the emission which is being calculated based on the energy consumption data. The third thing comes in, basically score 3 is company production output. Now, as you can understand that, for every sector, there'll be some regional, some country level, or some global level physical intensity available. So based on that physical intensity multiplied by the production of that company, you can again derive the investee company's emission. And based on that, the banks can calculate their financed emission. Now, as you can see that there are some level of estimations that are happening, and that's why the data score moves from 2 to 3. Again, here the big challenge comes for the banks to identify the right level of physical intensities, right? When I'm talking about a steel plant in Abu Dhabi versus a steel plant in Uganda, or probably a steel plant in Saudi Arabia, all of them would have a different sort of a physical intensity. Producing each ton of steel in UAE would be different than each ton of steel being produced in India or China. And that's where it becomes very crucial and important for the bank to have a good control over the physical intensity factors as such. So that's where, if you have that level of control, you can still manage to get score 3 as such. Coming to the next one, which is about the economic intensity. Now, economic intensity, as the name suggests, instead of per ton of steel production, the carbon emission, you're talking about per dollar revenue generated by that company based carbon emission. So this is again sort of economic intensity, and basis that you can calculate using company's revenue multiplied by that economic intensity, and you can come up with the investee's emission and finally the financed emission. The worst score would definitely be score 5, where you're not looking even at the company's level, but you're looking at the whole sector as such, right? The aluminum sector's economic intensity in China as a whole. Now, this is again, you can see that as you go from micro to macro level of data, that is where the data score also goes the other way, which is goes down further. So that's how you do basically sort of a juggle between what investees should be classified to get actually either the verified emission or energy consumption data, so that your overall data score still ranges between 1 to 2 or 2.5, which still is reasonably good score. However, if on the contrary, the bank simply looks at, oh, find out some local intensities, some global intensities, let's just work out on some finance emission number, invariably the score would fall between the category of 4 and 5, which is definitely a good exercise to do, but would not get you what the bank's intention is, to get the recognition of their efforts to really identify that where the biggest emission source is in basically sitting into their investment portfolio as such. Next, please. So similarly, the data scores, again defined as per PCAF for commercial real estate, you can again see that as you go from sort of a micro level to a macro level in terms of investee emission data, the data score goes down and down. So similarly, the next one. Coming to the vehicle loans. Now, vehicle loans, again, in the similar case, if you have got actual fuel consumption data, actual emission data, that makes your calculation more and more perfect. If that's not the case, again, you can look at probably some regional intensities of the vehicle, type of vehicle. Now you just know that there is a 4x4 vehicle, SUV one. What is the fuel consumption and what could be an average run? Based on that, if you calculate the overall intensity numbers, again, whatever the derived financed emission from there would always be between score 4 and 5. Now, the real reason why one should be really putting a strong sort of emphasis on finding out the high data quality score associated with finance emission is very clear, right? The bank is investing heavily into multiple different assets. The bigger idea or the bigger sort of objective behind calculating this finance emission is to identify opportunities where a bank can bring in more dollars to help their investees cut their emission, right? If I today calculating at a bank level, my overall finance emission and my data quality score is very low, it is not going to give me the right directional signal that which is that particular sector or which is that particular investee that I should be engaging with to really identify that transition financing opportunities. And that's why a high data quality score for a bank becomes sort of a guiding light to really identify those opportunities with the investment and help finance this climate transition, sort of a risk transition as such, transition risk. So this is precisely the reason why before jumping into the calculations around financed emission, bank needs to really look into their asset books completely, identify hotspots, what are the biggest set of investments, what are those sectors that I'm investing in, what are those investee companies who are contributing and who could possibly contribute the maximum amount of financed emission, and then look out engaging with them in terms of identifying the right data sets. If those right data sets are still not available, then look out for very authentic data sources where I can look upon physical and economic intensities and ensure still my score remains in that band of 1 to 3. So that's the overall objective of identifying a very clear data quality score as such. Move to the next one, please. Now, to put this to summary, as we've seen that in the financed emission, the challenges are more once you go deep dive into it. Finance emission otherwise becomes pretty straightforward and pretty simple. You need to find out attribution factor and you need to multiply by the investee emission. But the problem comes in when you go into the detail of identifying each and every investment's actual emission or estimated emission and look at the overall attribution factor. And that's where the whole exercise becomes more and more complex as the size of the asset book increases. Now, if you put in summary, how it starts with selecting a reporting framework. So you identify that the overall framework which the bank wants to report their climate action against. And once that is identified, the calculation frameworks remains the same, which is PCAF, which helps banks to really start working on their overall emissions, identifying and classifying all asset types. So all 7 different categories of asset types, the bank need to identify each and every asset type, identify the attribution factor for each asset, or the investment that they have done, collect the emission data from the investee companies. So that's definitely the first preference, where the bank would like to collect the direct emission data from the investee companies. If that's not available, look out for identifying the data gaps, prioritize the high data quality scores there, and then finally working out the overall financed emission as such. So that's how, in a nutshell, you start from identifying the framework and reach to the financed emission calculation. Next one, please. Right. So Shiv, you have a break here, so you can please take.
So we finally come to the Q&A section, and if anybody has any kind of query, it could be a query related to the content that was shared in this webinar or something specific to your organization. Feel free to go to the Q&A section and share your questions with us. So we do have a first question already in, Vivek. How can a financial sector company, which is stock exchange or market infrastructure institution, use these models to calculate its scope 2 and 3 emissions?
Right. Thanks for the question, and it's a very unique one. If I'm understanding it correct, the financial sector company, which is stock exchange or market infrastructure institution. Now, for them particularly, this is like any other business. This is like a business which is providing a platform or sort of a marketplace, right? Which is helping multiple companies to identify themselves and probably sell their services. Similarly, in this case, the market institution or the stock exchange as such, for them, scope 2 and scope 3 primarily would revolve around. Scope 2 is pretty much their electricity consumption, their cooling consumption, multiple servers that they might be located to run their exchanges as such. That would all entail their scope 2 emission. The scope 3 emission for them would be all around the leased assets, right? The multiple assets that they might be deploying in. A typical scope 3 emission around the employees, the business travel, right? Providing all that service. So this is this is like a standard business calculating their scope 3 emissions as such. For them, since they themselves are not into investments, they are providing a platform where multiple companies are listing their stocks or basically assets out there, and the other buyers are coming, and basically that whole arrangement in terms of buying and selling is happening on that platform, right? So this is more of a marketplace for me, and from that perspective, the overall emission from them would be as good as any e-commerce company or a marketplace company's carbon emissions are. For them, this financed emission module would not be relevant, because financed emission module is more relevant for the companies who are directly into actually investing in money into a particular asset, buying those assets either partially or fully, and basically helping those companies in which they are investing in, or the assets or project they are investing in, let them emit or do the emissions. So that's the perspective of utilizing financed emission. For me, any market making company would have somewhat similar sort of business principles as an e-com company.
Thank you for that insight, Vivek. I hope, Pankaj, that answered your question. I would oblige everyone if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A post, and we'll do our best to do justice to it. You're welcome, Pankaj. Seeing that there are no other questions at the moment, I think we can just proceed ahead and bring this to a completion.
Sure. Thanks, Shiv. Right. So as we were mentioning that we come up with a strong platform called Zero, which helps the banks, the financial institutions, the investment banks, the asset owners, insurance companies to really help navigate this whole challenge around finance emission. We've taken all due diligence in understanding all the challenges and the sort of support, the data backup that is required with the tool, and hence we come up with this platform which helps end-to-end measuring their financed emission, and not just stops there, but helps them working on their transition financing, their portfolio balancing, the risk management around the transition financing, all of that into one module itself. Next slide, please. You can look at it, coming back to the question earlier, around the calculation mechanisms as such. The tool that we offer is built on purely GAG protocol and PCAF guidelines when it comes to financed emission. It captures verbatim how these frameworks they require, mandate the companies to do their whole calculations and the complete accounting. So it takes care of scope 1, 2, and 3 fully, helps you identify all the suppliers, the scope 3 related emission, whether you are an e-com company or a large industrial manufacturer. So that's what it helps you do end-to-end carbon management in one place, one shot. Coming specifically to the topic of today's discussion around financed emission, the tool has a module around financed emission specifically, which helps banks in the first level to look at overview of all their investments. So as you can see in this dashboard picture, it tells you that what is the total level of investment that the bank has done, under which asset, what level of emissions are coming, whether it is project finance, listed equity. It tells you at an overall sort of an overview level, it tells you emission which are coming from various different investment of yours. It also helps you understand the portfolio carbon intensity, weighted average carbon intensity, overall data quality score. As I was emphasizing more on that, the tool gets you to know exactly what is the data score your overall financed emission is going to be. And it also helps you engage with your investees at the same time. So while we understand that for a bank to reach out to their investee companies, asking for all this data, going back and forth, it could become really burdensome. And that's what the tool alleviates completely, helping automate this whole engagement with investee companies, where they can fill in their data with a click of a button that gets back to the platform, and the whole calculation gets automated from there on. The next one, please. So within the financed emission, as you can see that the whole regional coverage of your investments would be captured out there. Every asset, every country level, you can find out which is the sector where you have invested in the maximum, which is giving you maximum amount of contribution on financed emission as such. So this is the overall philosophy with which the whole tool works around the financed emission calculation bit of it, the baselining bit of it. What it does is that, as we were talking about, in scenarios where the investee companies might not be helping you to provide with the right investment data, right emission data, in that case, the tool is backed with almost 85,000 assets all across globally and regionally very, very strongly, where we get the data at an asset level. So if you're talking about a cement plant in Abu Dhabi, or Quain we are looking at in a steel plant, we would exactly pinpoint that asset and identify the overall emissions coming from that asset. So this helps you really figure out your data score not just remains in the level of 3 and 4, but goes to the level of 2 to 1. So this is precisely what we do. With the help of these proprietary databases, we identify and track the emission to the asset level, to the country level, to region level, and then to the global level. Beyond this, the tool is backed with the financial data, the emission data of more than 55,000 entities as such, which again helps even in the case where the financial data for calculation of attribution factor is missing. You have the data backup there. So we get fed with the fact set data on the financials of the companies, which covers everything from the production to revenue to asset turnover ratios to the balance sheet, debt, equity. All of those elements are already fully stuffed into the platform. This again helps wherever there is a data gap. We have an alternate source available at the back end, either specific to that company. If that company is not available in the database, then we identify the very close proximity, other companies, similar entities in the similar sector, in the similar region, and help you identify the right proxy for that data. The overall objective with which the tool and the data is being provided in the tool is to ensure that the data quality score moves north in all scenarios. So that's the overall background of the data as such. Next one, I believe this should be the last. Yeah. So sectoral coverage of investments, again, it provides all sort of analytics around. You can drill down into any specific sector. Within that sector, what sort of investment that you've done. So you can take any sort of an approach. You can start from your investment asset classes. You want to look into all your commercial real estate. Within that commercial real estate, how many companies that you've invested in, what sort of investment has been done, and how those respective investments, let's say between MR and let's say Miraz, or sorry, Miraz is not there now, MR and Shobha, and any other investment company for that matter, you can pick up all those respective investments and how the emissions are coming out from those particular investments.
So we'll be giving the decarbonization roadmap as a final output of our tool. So it will be end-to-end solution from carbon accounting to decarbonization. And this is the end of our webinar. If you have any question, please drop out.
I think we had another question from Pankaj, but he's not here in the call anymore, so we can probably respond him back one-on-one.
Yeah, we'll be.
So yes, that brings us towards the end of the webinar. I hope that everyone found this webinar to be quite insightful, and please keep a lookout